Have you ever walked past someone every day, never thinking twice, only to later realize they were carrying a story far greater than your own? At Lincoln Elementary, there was a man who came before the first bell. Always before the sun had fully risen, before the hallway lights blinked on. Most people didn't even notice him. But the floors were always clean. The flag was always raised just right. And the building always smelled faintly of lemon oil and something older, something like time itself. His name was Mr. Walter Hayes. The janitor. Gray cap, dark green work shirt, sleeves always rolled, eyes always lowered. He never interrupted a conversation, never missed a light bulb out of place. If a child ran down the hallway, he gently raised a hand, not to scold, just to remind. Quietness was his language. Some teachers said he had been there for over a decade. Others didn't really know when he started. But they all agreed on one thing: he never spoke about himself. Never mentioned family. Never took personal calls. Just worked. Steady. Simple. Like a metronome no one had set. The children liked him. Especially the quiet ones. They said he smiled more with his eyes than with his mouth. And on certain mornings, when the wind was just right and the school was still asleep, you could catch him outside, gently folding the American flag like it was something sacred. Always the same way. Always with two hands, never rushed. Never talking. One morning, a teacher saw him standing by the flagpole, long after he had folded the flag and walked away. Just standing. Looking back at it. Not moving. And when she asked if everything was all right, he simply said, "Just remembering." No one asked what. They probably should have. There was something else about Mr. Hayes that the teachers began to notice. Every time the school held a flag ceremony, even the small ones, even when no parents were around, he was there. Not close, never front and center. But somewhere in the back, near the old oak tree or behind the cafeteria's fence. Always standing. Always still. One hand held just behind his back, the other curled slightly at his side like it wanted to salute but chose not to. He never clapped when the students sang. Never said the pledge aloud. But when the last note faded, and everyone turned to go, he remained where he was. Like the silence afterward still had something to teach him. Mrs. Langford, one of the older teachers, once approached him after a Veterans Day assembly. She had noticed his eyes. Not tearful, but distant. Like he was standing in two places at once. "You used to serve, didn't you?" she asked gently. Mr. Hayes looked at her for a long moment. Then his gaze drifted down toward the ground. "I used to carry flags," he said softly. "But not the ones that go up in the morning." He didn't say more. Just nodded once and walked back into the school. After that, no one questioned his presence at the ceremonies. Even when it rained, even when the speaker system broke and the students mumbled through the anthem, he was there. Silent. Steady. The principal once offered him a seat up front, just out of courtesy. But Mr. Hayes shook his head. "Kids should be the ones to stand proud," he said. "I've had my time." No one knew what he meant by that. But somehow, the way he said it made you feel like there was a weight behind every word. Not the kind that crushes you, the kind you carry because it means something. And so he stood, ceremony after ceremony, without fail. Rain or sun. And the flag never fell from its line. There was one thing Mr. Hayes always had with him, something he never spoke about and no one dared ask. A small, rectangular box. Roughly the size of a shoebox, wrapped in a faded blue cloth and tied with a fraying leather strap. He kept it near him no matter where he went. Some days it sat neatly tucked beside his mop bucket. Other times, it was placed gently on a shelf in the custodian's closet, out of reach but never out of sight. People assumed it held tools. Maybe old photos. A packed lunch, even. But no one ever saw him open it. One afternoon, a second grader named Lily fell while running down the hallway. Scraped her knees pretty badly. Mr. Hayes happened to be just around the corner. He knelt beside her, murmured a quiet, "You're all right," and pulled a clean rag from his back pocket. He handed it to her, then glanced toward the box. It had slipped from its usual place and landed awkwardly on its side. He moved fast, not rushed, but intentional. Picked it up with both hands, adjusted the strap, and held it tightly against his chest for a moment. Lily, still teary-eyed but curious, asked, "Is that where you keep Band-Aids?" Mr. Hayes smiled faintly. "No, sweetheart," he said. "This box, it's not for fixing scrapes." She didn't understand, of course. But the way he said it made her stop crying. From that day on, some of the teachers started paying more attention. They noticed that he never left the box in the open for long. If someone came too close, even unintentionally, he would gently shift it farther away. Not protectively, reverently. Like someone might if they were guarding something that didn't belong to them, but meant everything. Mrs. Langford saw it once, early in the morning. She walked into the break room while he was pouring coffee. The box was resting on the counter. The cloth had slipped just slightly. She caught a glimpse of the corner, dark wood, worn smooth at the edges, with a small brass hinge. She didn't say anything. Just smiled, nodded, and walked out. Mr. Hayes followed moments later, the box already back in his hands. It became clear over time, whatever was inside wasn't for anyone else. It wasn't about hiding something. It was about carrying it. And as the years passed, that small, unremarkable box became part of him. Not as a mystery to solve, but as a reminder that some things are held close not because they're secret, but because they're sacred. It was a chilly Friday morning in May, the kind that carried the scent of cut grass and fresh paint from the gym walls. Armed Forces Day at Lincoln Elementary didn't usually draw much attention, just a short assembly, a few patriotic songs, and maybe a slideshow with old photos borrowed from students' families. This year, Mrs. Langford had suggested something different. A chair of honor, she called it. A single empty chair placed center stage, draped in the American flag, meant to symbolize the service and sacrifice of those who had worn the uniform. It was simple, quiet, and it felt right. The students filed in slowly. First graders whispering, fifth graders trying to look disinterested but stealing glances at the flag-covered chair. Parents sat in folding chairs at the back, some holding programs, others just waiting for the event to end so they could get on with their day. Mr. Hayes had come in early, as always. He didn't say anything when he saw the chair. But he paused. Just for a second. Then kept walking, pushing his mop cart down the hallway like it was any other morning. But he didn't leave. He stood just outside the auditorium doors, hands behind his back, watching as the music teacher led the choir through "God Bless America." His eyes didn't move from the stage. Midway through the program, the principal, Mr. Delaney, stepped up to the mic. His voice was steady, but a little softer than usual. "This morning," he said, "we honor those who have served, quietly, humbly, without asking for anything in return. We set this chair to remind ourselves that even when we don't see them, their service surrounds us." He paused, then looked out at the crowd. "If anyone here today has served in the United States Armed Forces, we invite you to stand." Silence. A few heads turned. Some parents shifted in their seats. And then, from the back corner of the room, a figure stepped forward. Mr. Hayes didn't move quickly. He walked the same way he always did, deliberate, measured, like every step mattered. At first, no one reacted. They weren't sure what was happening. But then Lily, the little second grader, gasped softly and whispered, "That's Mr. Hayes." The room fell completely still. He approached the chair of honor, then stopped a few feet away. He didn't touch the flag. Didn't speak. But he did something no one had ever seen him do. He reached into his work jacket, pulled out the familiar box, and gently set it on the floor beside the chair. Then he stood tall. Straighter than anyone thought he could. His eyes didn't move. His hands at his side. A few beats passed before Mr. Delaney found his voice again. "Mr. Hayes, would you allow us to honor your service?" Mr. Hayes looked at him for a long moment. Then gave a small nod. It wasn't a performance. There was no anthem playing. No medals shining in the spotlight. Just an old man. A janitor. Standing beside a flag and a box, as if he had finally let something be seen that had waited too long in the dark. And for once, the school saw him, not as the man who mopped the floors, but as something else entirely. A quiet presence who had always been more than he let on. After the assembly ended, people didn't leave right away. Parents stood in small clusters, whispering. Some looked at Mr. Hayes with wide, uncertain eyes. Children tugged at their sleeves, asking quiet questions they didn't know how to answer. The chair of honor still sat at the center of the stage, but it wasn't the chair people were focused on anymore, it was the man who had stood beside it. Mr. Hayes didn't linger. He picked up the small wooden box, gave a polite nod to Mr. Delaney, and quietly made his way toward the back of the auditorium. He didn't expect to be stopped. But someone was waiting. It was Mrs. Langford. "Mr. Hayes," she said, gently touching his arm. "May I ask you something?" He paused, eyes soft but guarded. Did you ever wear rank?" she asked, almost whispering. "You stood like someone who did." Mr. Hayes looked at her for a long time. Not surprised. Just tired in a way that had nothing to do with age. "I was given rank," he said quietly. "But I stopped using it the day I left the field." She waited, giving him space. He continued. "Lieutenant Colonel. That's what the paperwork says. That's what the box holds. But I don't claim it." "Why not?" she asked, her voice trembling. He looked down at the box in his hands. "There were men under my command," he said. "Good men. Brave. Better than me. They didn't get to walk away. They didn't get to push a mop down quiet halls. I carried them with me, every day. But that title, that uniform, it didn't belong to just me." There was a silence between them. Not awkward. Not forced. Just full. "And the box?" she asked. His fingers tightened around it, not possessive, just steady. "I open it once a year," he said. "I look at what's inside. Remind myself of the cost. Then I close it again. Because some honors don't need to be worn. They just need to be remembered." Behind them, the sound of chairs being folded and children laughing began to rise again. The moment was ending. Mrs. Langford nodded slowly. Her voice caught as she said, "You didn't have to stand today. But I'm glad you did." Mr. Hayes gave the faintest smile. "I didn't stand for me," he said. "I stood for the ones who couldn't." And then he walked away, quiet, deliberate, the same way he always had. But everyone who saw him that day knew one thing now, without being told. He hadn't just served. He had led. And he had never stopped carrying the weight of those he led. On the Monday after the assembly, something unexpected began to happen. As Mr. Hayes walked through the front entrance of the school, mop bucket trailing behind him like always, a small boy standing by the wall stiffened his back and raised his right hand in a salute. A little awkward, but earnest. Mr. Hayes paused. He didn't return the salute. Just gave a quiet nod and kept walking. By Thursday, there were 5 or 6 students doing it. First and second graders mostly, some of them too young to understand rank or protocol. But they had seen something in him. Something they wanted to honor in the only way they knew how. At first, Mr. Hayes tried to wave it off. Said things like, "You don't have to do that, kid," or "Save that for real soldiers." But they kept doing it anyway. Every morning. Every hallway. Even Lily, the little girl who once scraped her knee, started leaving a red, white, and blue sticker on his mop handle once a week. Never said a word. Just left it and walked on. Mr. Delaney noticed. One morning, he asked, "Does it bother you?" Mr. Hayes looked at him, thoughtful. "No," he said. "It humbles me." The salutes weren't formal. They weren't perfect. But they were genuine. Quiet acknowledgments from children too young to fully grasp what service meant, yet old enough to sense it when they saw it. And slowly, without ceremony or command, Mr. Hayes became more than a custodian. He became a figure they looked up to. Not because he asked for it, but because he never did. After the assembly, a few parents approached Mr. Delaney. They wanted to organize something, maybe a plaque, maybe a recognition at the district level. One mother even suggested nominating Mr. Hayes for a state honor. But when the principal brought it up, Mr. Hayes shook his head. "No need for that," he said quietly. "I've already been honored more than I deserve." He never elaborated. But after that day, the box, his box, never left his side during school hours. It used to be something he kept tucked away. Now it sat beside his mop bucket, right where the kids could see it as they passed in the hall. Not to draw attention, but as if it needed to be seen, just once, before disappearing again. One afternoon, a curious 5th grader named Malcolm asked him straight out, "What's in the box, Mr. Hayes?" Mr. Hayes looked down at it, then back at the boy. "Something I earned," he said. "And something I carry." The boy blinked. "Is it a medal?" Mr. Hayes nodded once. Then knelt slightly so they were eye level. "But a medal's just a piece of metal, Malcolm," he said. "What matters is what you did for it, and who didn't come home to get theirs." The boy didn't ask anything else. He didn't need to. And the medal? It never came out of the box again. Not at school. Not even when Veterans Day rolled around the next year. It stayed there, wrapped in quiet fabric, tucked in wood, kept close not for pride, but for remembrance. Some things, Mr. Hayes believed, weren't meant to be worn on your chest. They were meant to be held close to your heart. The following year, Armed Forces Day came quietly to Lincoln Elementary. Spring had arrived early. The flag out front fluttered gently in a soft breeze. The grass had just been cut. The folding chairs were set up like they always were, facing the stage in neat rows. But this time, there was no question in anyone's mind what the empty chair on stage represented. Mr. Walter Hayes hadn't been seen in several weeks. The custodial closet stayed locked. The familiar sound of his mop gliding across the tiles had fallen silent. And the little box, wrapped in blue cloth, was no longer by the hallway door. There were rumors, of course, that he had moved. That he was in the hospital. That he'd simply stepped away. No one seemed to know for sure. But everyone felt the space he left behind. The staff debated whether or not to continue the tradition. Whether to place the chair of honor again. It was Mrs. Langford who said, "We don't stop remembering someone just because they're no longer here." And so the chair remained. This time, a small folded American flag lay on the seat. And beneath it, a box, identical in shape, carefully wrapped in aged blue cloth, was placed gently by Lily, now a third grader. She didn't say a word. Just walked up to the stage with Malcolm beside her and set it down with both hands. No music played that day. No speech was given. Mr. Delaney stood briefly at the mic and said only this. He showed us how to serve. How to carry weight without complaint. And how to leave behind something greater than a name. And then he stepped away. The children sat in silence, more still than usual. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the trees beyond the fence. And for a long moment, it felt like Mr. Hayes was still there, watching, quietly, the way he always had. Somewhere near the back. One hand behind his back. The other resting gently at his side. Mr. Walter Hayes never asked for attention. He never wore his rank, never shared his title, and never spoke about what he'd earned. Yet through quiet consistency, small acts of dignity, and the burden he carried without complaint, he taught an entire school what true honor looks like. His life reminds us that courage isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's found in the quietest corners, in the early mornings, the folded flags, and the unopened box held close to the heart. He didn't stand to be seen. He stood so others could remember. And when he was gone, it wasn't the medals or the rank people spoke of, it was the way he made them feel, the way he made them pause and reflect. At a time when recognition is often shouted, Mr. Hayes showed us the lasting power of silent service. So here's the question: who are the quiet heroes in your life, the ones who serve without being asked, who carry more than they show? If this story moved you, help us keep these legacies alive. Like, share, and subscribe to Legacy of Courage Stories, because some stories deserve to be remembered, even if the people in them never asked to be.